Hello everyone and welcome to the 7th video in the FINA 5000 DCF tutorial series. My name is Harrison Ham, and in this video we're going to be using FactSet to download information on comparable companies for our comps analysis. The first thing we need to do to download our information is open up FactSet and then search for our company. So I'll search for Home Depot. Then over here on the left side underneath the Overviews tab, you can scroll down to right here where it says Comps and click on that. So this is the Comps tool. It's really useful for downloading information on a bunch of different companies, and you get to pick exactly what information you want to download, and you can download it all in one convenient spreadsheet. The first thing you need to consider when doing your comps analysis is what exactly are your comps going to be? What companies are you going to compare your company to? So FactSet uses an algorithm to determine a couple companies that it thinks might be good comparables for your company. So for example, for Home Depot, it includes things like Sears, Berkshire Hathaway, Wayfair, At Home Group. But sometimes it'll include companies that don't really make a whole lot of sense. So there's a couple factors that I'm going to go over with you about what you should consider when choosing your comps. The first thing you should consider when choosing your comps is what companies engage in similar business activities compared to your company. So for Home Depot, a similar company, the first thing that pops into my mind would be Lowe's, which FactSet for some reason didn't even include Lowe's in their comparables, despite the fact that it's probably the best comp that I have, which just shows that there's some issues with the algorithm. The second thing you want to consider is, does the comparable company engage in only the same business activities as your company? So for example, FactSet includes Berkshire Hathaway as a comparable company for Home Depot by default. And the reason it does this is because Berkshire Hathaway engages in a lot of home building and industrials activities. The thing about Berkshire Hathaway is that it also engages in a lot of other different business activities like financing and all sorts of crazy stuff. So comparing it to Home Depot really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because the company as a whole is very different from Home Depot, despite the fact that it's one of Home Depot's main competitors. So because of that, we're not going to include Berkshire Hathaway as one of our comps, just because overall the company is very different from Home Depot. The next thing you want to consider is whether your comparable companies have a very similar size and age compared to your company. The reason being that very new and small and quickly growing companies are not going to have the same valuation ratios as an old mature company, for example like Home Depot, which is about 40 years old and already has a market cap of about $350 billion. So comparing Home Depot to a bunch of small cap stocks really wouldn't make a whole lot of sense, because by nature a very large company behaves a lot differently from a very small company. So I'm going to go ahead and remove all of these companies that have very small market caps compared to Home Depot, and we'll in a moment replace those with ones that make a little more sense. Next, you need to consider if the comparable company is in similar financial condition compared to your company. So for example, FactSet included Sears as a comparable company, despite the fact that Sears filed for bankruptcy in 2018 and had to restructure much of its debt in order to stay afloat. Because of that, Sears doesn't even have a market cap because its equity value is basically at zero at this point. So comparing Home Depot to Sears would not make a whole lot of sense, so we're going to go ahead and exclude that as well from our analysis. The final thing you need to consider is whether your comparable company is a publicly traded company or not. The reason being that 1, it's difficult to find information on privately traded companies, and 2, the valuations of privately traded companies are very different from those of publicly traded companies. So if your company is public, you can't really compare it to a private company because they're going to have very different valuations. So once you've done some research and picked out what your comps are, you just go up here to the top right where there's this little search bar to add the companies that you want to add. So I'm going to add Walmart, Tractor Supply, Kingfisher, and then Hornbosch. So one thing to keep in mind is that I added 2 companies that are from Europe. And the reason that I did this is because they're actually better comparables than a lot of the companies that I was finding in the US, despite the fact that they trade on European exchanges. But that may not always be the case for you. Obviously, companies that are in Europe are going to be slightly different from those that are within the US, so just keep that in mind, that could be a factor that ends up affecting your analysis. So now that you have your comps, the next thing we need to do is actually pick out which evaluation metrics we want to download the information for. To do this, we're going to create a custom table. So you go up here and click on this little drop-down menu next to the search bar, and click on this green plus arrow in order to create a custom table. And I'm going to call this the FINA 5000 tutorial table. So then now you have to go and search through and actually pick out which evaluation metrics you want to use in your analysis. So for our analysis, there's 3 main evaluation metrics that we're going to use. First, we're going to use the enterprise value over EBITDA. So to do that, I'm actually just going to search EBITDA, and then scroll down and find enterprise value over EBITDA, and we're going to do actual, and then we're going to do the enterprise value over EBIT. So I just search for EBIT and then scroll down. We find enterprise value over EBIT actual, and then next we're going to download the PE ratios. So that would be price to earnings. So search price and then to earnings, price to earnings actual. And then these are the three main evaluation metrics that we're going to use in our table, but you can download anything that you think would be important for displaying the competitive landscape around your company. You can add that here so that you can have it within your spreadsheet so you have easy access to that information. So I've included some ratios that I think are pretty useful in general. The ROA, ROE, and return on invested capital are pretty useful because they display how well Home Depot generates income compared to its competitors. But your company may be different. Maybe you're concerned about the debt ratios, for example. So you might want to be looking up some debt ratios to add to this table. Or for example, maybe your pitch revolves around shrinking EBITDA margins. So you might want to include the EBITDA margin for your company so that you can display how its shrinking margins would give it an advantage over its competitors. One more thing to consider is that FactSet also has forward-looking versions of all the ratios. So if you were making the argument that your EBITDA margins are going to be shrinking in the next couple of years, then you could actually use the forward-looking EBITDA margin to help make that argument. So you could include this in your table and then basically say, okay, look, this is what the broker consensus is saying, that these EBITDA margins are going to become smaller, which is going to give Home Depot a competitive advantage, if that were the type of thing that you're trying to argue. But once you have your ratios all picked out, you basically just go down here to the bottom right and click Create in order to create your table. And then once your table pops up, you go up here to the top right and hit this little green download arrow in order to download the information. You can download as Excel and just cell values, so you don't have to actually change anything there. So just hit Download and then click Open. So once your spreadsheet actually downloads, then all you have to do is copy and paste the table over into the Comps tab of our spreadsheet. And do not include the average and median in this copy and paste, because these average and medians include Home Depot in their calculation, which is not what we want to do. We're going to actually calculate those ourselves. So you just copy and then go over to the Comps tab on our DCF template and then go ahead and paste. And then now you have all the downloaded information that you need for the next step. In this video, we chose our comparable companies and chose a few key evaluation metrics that we're going to use to compare our company to its comps. Then we use the FactSet Comps tool to download all the information in one convenient table. In the next video, we're going to use this information to actually calculate a terminal value using the multiples method, and then we'll calculate a new implied share price for our company. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.